de contar con dos personas que nos acompañan en este panel para hablar sobre la situación del COVID-19 en relación a los inmigrantes. We are here with this panel. We're going to talk about the situation, the COVID-19 and the migrants outcomes. We are waiting maybe a couple of minutes with the people can organize. We will have here with the Judy Wright and Soleil Muhadi. We're going to talk about UK and how we are in the place, how we work in the with migrant people in this crisis moment, and also what is the experience and knowledge about that. I'm going to, the first one, I'm going to introduce myself, and I work, I am Nancy Liscano, and I am the moderator of the panel this afternoon. We will have 1 hour, and we're going to talk about migrant well-being and mental health with these circumstances, the COVID-19. And we will have 2 speakers, Judy Wright and Soleil Muhandi, and also apologize from Maria Linford Hall. She was not well today, but we will read her paper. And talk about migrants and these circumstances is a challenge for everyone, because one of the aspects I want to recognize is migrant people also is a hero. Heroes in this moment. Los inmigrantes también somos unos héroes en este momento. Why is the heroes in this moment? Because it's in to have different situations and challenge for people to manage crisis is different when you have resource, when you have some support. But when you have some difficulties or too much difficulties, or you are in circumstances you can't move, that is very, very vulnerable situation. Many migrant people in London, for example, live in a stage. Many of people share the rooms, share flats, and also many of people, of migrant people, don't speak the properly language to understand many of the news. But around the vulnerability and for the situation, people, migrant people, have so many difficulties at this moment is because they need work, they need response for the challenge, they need response for the emission. Some of them they escape for many countries, or some of them they looking for opportunities. And when all the circumstances is very difficulties for work, or also to support the families, it's not easy for parents, migrants, in this case for Latin America community, when they are working in the sector like cleaners, and they don't have enough money to pay nannies or to support with the children. That is so difficult, these circumstances. One of the research I am doing for Latin America people, families, and reunite families, we observe how increased the anxiety and how increased the domestic balance, how increased for the children and young people, many tensions about them in beginning of March. And after that, we observe how these families or members of families need to recognize and to be more creativity to organize they, because they needed to still to work, because they need to pay and they need to save the money. Many of them, they don't have the benefits for the government. They need to go to work, and also still in these circumstances and with the thinking about sicknesses, but also the money. And in our research we are doing with Joseba Achutegui, with 100 members of family, we couldn't to see that the majority of the migrants, when they are come together, they are less level of depression, and they can have a very good attachment, that is possibility to the member of the family have a better personality or self-esteem in order to have resource for the different situation of their life. But when the families reunite late, and also they need to pass for many stressors in order to have the documentation, so what we say papeles, that is very difficult for the attachment in the between members of the family. And also this is one of the big vulnerability for the mental health for these families. And but one of the big aspects we need to recognize is migrants or Latin American people. We will see a big resilience with art, the community.
Que han pasado por esta experiencia, hemos visto una gran resiliencia, cómo la comunidad ha sido empoderada para obtener oportunidades, para organizar y encontrar la misión de cumplir sus sueños. Ahora
a paper and support to have less time to reunite families. And this is some policies the government need to understand around Europe, how they save money if we organize and support the reunite families and support in the city. And in this process, in the coronavirus in London for Latin America people, like many of migrants have in another very tricky moment, because in Latin America we had a very difficult moment too for about crisis, and so escape for Latin America, come back for Latin America is not one of the aspects we are thinking. So stay here with these circumstances. Many of them, they lost jobs, they don't have money, but at the same time they can come back for their countries. It's very difficult this moment for everybody, but for migrants is another stressor. For migrants is another aspect we need to organize and also restructurate and learning in this journey when we have a migrant. And that is one of the aspects we're going to talk with Judy and Soleil, how we have so many refugees people and also asylum seekers, and how the communities we can introduce some programs in this crisis to support families and to support their environment and in these circumstances. That is why we have I'm going to present the Professor Judy Wright. I think that she is here, Judy. She will speak now. She is the PhD, is co-founder of the Bath Center for Psychotherapy and Counseling and the Center for Supervision, Training and Development. She is UKCP accredited psychotherapist and works as a psychotherapist, supervisor, and trainer. She is the director and supervision of Trauma Foundation Southwest, which provide counseling and psychotherapy for refugees and asylum seekers. She has completed the doctoral research into the whiteness with psychotherapy and psychotherapy organization in the University of Bath. She wrote 3 books that is important books for migrants and people, also for the professionals support. This publication is from 2009, 2019, and that publication is to support about the integrative psychotherapy in the theory and practice and relational, systemic, and ecologic approach. And that is Judy Wright. She will talk about the kit of issues that especially arise for refugees and asylum seekers during the pandemic, when many of the services offered to them are restricted or cancelled. That is one of the opportunity to listen to Judy. She has more than 20 years experience, work with refugees people, support this community. Sometimes we don't think that is very real, and we're thinking about migrants, but how is this process for the refugee and asylum people to integrate an inclusion in the system. Vamos entonces ahora a recibir a Judy Wright, que nos va a hablar sobre el trabajo con los refugiados y los asilados a través en esta pandemia, de cómo han podido apoyar a estas personas cuando ni siquiera muchos servicios están ofreciendo apoyo o que los servicios están muy restringidos. Judy es PhD y co-founder del Centro BACS de Psicoterapia and Counseling. Tiene 3 libros muy importantes para el apoyo profesional de la psicología integrativa para el apoyo de los inmigrantes. Le damos la bienvenida a Judy. Welcome to Judy Wright. Thank you very much to accept our invitation. I think you can, your microphone is off.
Oh,
Yeah.
now it's off. Well, very nice to be here. Thanks for having me. I feel very honoured. So I'm going to talk about how refugees and asylum seekers' mental health is impacted by COVID-19. And as Nancy said, I'm the founder and director of Trauma Foundation Southwest, which is a charity that works in Bath and Bristol in the UK.
En Reino Unido, en Bath, en el suroeste, en una zona donde tenemos
for all our clients, unless I specifically mean asylum seekers. As far as I'm concerned, asylum seekers are refugees in the non-technical sense. I'll start by saying something about the mental health of refugees in general, and then go on to say how COVID has impacted on them. As I'm sure you know, the mental health of refugees is very compromised at the best of times because of the multiple and complex trauma they've experienced. They have what we might call in England a triple whammy of trauma. There is the extreme traumatization they received in the countries they came from. Many have been tortured, have been at risk of being killed, of seeing loved ones killed or injured, been imprisoned, etc. Those who become refugees somehow manage to get away. The lucky ones might get on an air flight, but most have horrific, grueling, and frightening journeys on foot and or in lorries or boats, constantly in fear of being caught, at the mercy of traffickers, and hungry and thirsty. So, of course, the journey itself is traumatizing as well. Then when they arrive in this country, they have to go through the asylum process. I guess that's the same all over the world, which typically involves an initial hearing. And in the UK, their claim is most often dismissed when it's first heard. And then there are various appeals. The lucky ones gain leave to remain, often limited in length. And the unlucky ones run out of options and either return to a very uncertain future or live from hand to mouth without recourse to public funds. So no income and no help from the public services, although they may have help from charities. At Trauma Foundation Southwest, our work is often grueling and on the face of it unrewarding, in that our refugee clients are unlikely to go into a bright future or even a tolerable one. We have to be prepared to stay with them through feelings of complete despair and hopelessness, as well as symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, such as sleeplessness, nightmares, and panic attacks. When working with us, often their mental health will improve for a while. The depth of their despair and sense of loss is being heard, and we show that we are trying to understand what life is like for them, what they have experienced. It is only too likely that they will receive very bad news, not just from having a claim refused, but other bad news, such as the death of a family member they haven't seen for a long time. This brings home their loss, not only for this person, but for their family, community, and culture. Although I've said how difficult our work is, it is also rewarding and moving in that we have contact and often a deep connection with people who faced such difficulty bravely, often heroically. So what is the impact of COVID-19 on those already suffering in this way? Firstly, it is strangely connecting. There is something ironically connecting about a pandemic. It is like a dark version of looking at the moon. All the world looks at the same moon. We are all experiencing the same pandemic. Of course, our refugee clients worry about friends and family back home that maybe don't have the same access to healthcare as in the UK. But there's also a sense of being in the same boat, as we say. Then there is the isolation. The mental health implications of isolation are in some ways similar to those of the general population. Often refugees are already isolated, and for some, COVID-19 hasn't made a lot of difference. Some refugees I know feel that others have joined them in their isolation, They feel less strange to be on their own, knowing that others are too. On the other hand, in Bristol and elsewhere in the UK, and I guess all over the world, there are many agencies that provide services for refugees. This importantly includes drop-in centres, which provide a lifeline of contact with other refugees and with professionals that can give help and advice, as well as food and activities. The contact in these places are often the nearest things that refugees have to a family. Being cut off from this contact is maybe the worst effect of the virus. This is particularly so for single people, often young men. There is a group of young Afghani men in Bristol, for example, that we know are particularly at risk. And we and other agencies in Bristol are looking for ways of supporting them. One of them recently committed suicide, and we fear others will follow suit. However, families are also suffering. While children were not at school, they had to live in very small rooms and flats for 24 hours a day, trying to keep children happy in such restriction. Several of us have clients for whom it was almost impossible to have a phone conversation because of the interruption and noise from children. Privacy is impossible. Many refugees do not understand and are mistrustful of English law and law enforcement. During lockdown, and as it eased, they were afraid to go out for fear of being arrested. Being given the information that it is fine to do so did not persuade many to leave their accommodation. The fear goes deeper than rational explanation. This has had implications for their physical as well as mental health. Now winter is coming. One of my clients, who would go no further than her garden, is facing cold weather so that sitting outside is no longer a pleasant option. Then there is fear for the future. Refugees, and particularly asylum seekers, always fear for the future. It is always uncertain for them, as they don't know if they can settle down to life in the UK or if they will be sent home. The pandemic has made the future look uncertain for everyone, but it has an added layer of uncertainty for asylum seekers. This is particularly the case because the government is being very slow at processing asylum claims at the moment, but have not stopped altogether. They are slow at the best of times, but are now even slower. So the uncertainty in the lives of asylum seekers can go on for years. There are also particular responses to COVID that are specific to specific individuals. Each of our individual clients may have specific responses to the pandemic that others may not share. For instance, there are some who are triggered into panic attacks by seeing people wearing masks. These kinds of responses are not amenable to reason. The fear goes deeper than that. If someone has come to you with a machete, for instance, while wearing a mask, simply knowing that the masks they see everywhere are a coronavirus precaution does not make it less terrifying. For people who are already frightened, this frightening pandemic increases the fear. It is a dangerous enemy and out of sight, an enemy that is implacable, potentially deadly, and might spring on you at any time. It piles on a level of fear to one that is already there, and the usual supports are not as present as they were. I say not as present because all the agencies that support refugees have still been functioning, though mostly at arm's length. There has been little face-to-face contact, and the drop-in centres have been closed. In the easing of lockdown, some face-to-face work has resumed, but meetings with groups have to be at social distance, not the buzzing, friendly mixing that happened before. Now we seem to be going towards a second lockdown, and one that will happen in cold weather. It is hard for refugees and workers that help them not to despair. So what of my own agency, Trauma Foundation Southwest? We have continued to see all our clients in some kind of remote way, though most can only manage the phone. Some use WhatsApp and a few use Zoom. Many of our clients need an interpreter to work with us, and arranging for one to be present as well in this situation is often challenging. Sometimes clients don't answer the phone. They're too sunk in despair to do so, or have finally fallen asleep, having been awake most of the night. We persist in trying to get through and leave messages of concern. We have also found innovative ways of seeing clients in person, such as in the park. This was more possible in the warm weather. Some of our therapists have started seeing individuals in person in our room in St. Paul's in Bristol, where clients are prepared to come in. Those who come by public transport are often wary of catching the virus that way. Some of our therapists are over 65 and feel they should not be seeing people in person themselves. This is a time of stress and distress for many in the population, but those who are the most vulnerable suffer the most, as usual. Refugees are certainly amongst those whose mental health are the most compromised, and trying to address this is very hard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judy. Right, is very important, this voice, and you have the voice for the refugees people, because sometimes, or so many times around the world, we are thinking in classified the migration, like third class migrants, second class refugees, is like the same. And so we're going to now going to invite to our next speakers, and when we finish all the speakers, we're going to have questions for you, Judy, and for all of the speakers. So it's welcome, and we appreciate the presence for Suli Muhandi. He accepted to come to the Congress because Suli Muhandi is a government official. Suli leads the engagement and participation of young people and migrant communities in South of East of London, championing the voices of diverse communities and development policies for better, more inclusive engagement and participation in communities and civic life. He works in community development, builds capacity for individuals and community and voluntary sectors organizations, enabling them to thrive and become more resilient and sustainable, involving them in political and non-political decision-making process. Suli worked with migrant communities as influence key issues such as health and well-being, housing, employment, and education, using his position for people and fight for creativity and engage to transform communities. Suli Muhammad is working for the government and community leader, an experienced performed poet and public speaker in leadership and engagement with the bachelor's degree in community and applied theater and leadership and governance. We are welcome to Suli Muhammad. Thank you very much for accept our invitations, and I was very pleased to have you in this Congress. Also because we work together in London for the migrant community in south of London. And so thank you very much. And we will listen you how we are working in London for with the community, engage the community and support the community in this crisis we have.
Thank you so much, Nancy, for that warm introduction. And again, as Nancy said, my name is Sulay Mahedin. I work for the government. It's a pleasure to join you here today. And also community projects on a wide range of projects with the communities, which also includes the Latin American community, young people, Black and ethnic minority communities as a whole, on a number of community development projects. My work particularly is focused around ensuring that those who don't have a voice.
Tiene menos y nunca ha habido colapso hospitalario y nunca.
Yeah, so my work mainly is oriented around ensuring that people who don't have a voice do have a voice. And over the last 10 years, I've worked within the arts and creative industry. I've worked in the corporate and public sector with the view to developing more engaging practices that capture the imaginations of those who we would call as hard to reach. A term that I strongly disagree with because I too was once labeled as hard to reach. Today, I'm going to share with you some of those practices that I've been implementing in my work to engage with these hard to reach communities, which in most cases are referred to as the ethnic minorities or the migrant communities. My background growing up in a London council estate as a young boy, I experienced firsthand the inequalities and the lack of opportunities for those growing up in poverty and coming from minority ethnic backgrounds. The recent events with COVID-19 and the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement following the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, USA, have further exacerbated and highlighted the inequalities which have taken a major toll on much of our Black, migrant and ethnic minority communities across the capital and beyond. I think now more than ever within certainly my kind of professional practice, it's more important to have more effective, positive engagement with our communities. Far too often, we use cultural difference and language as a main barrier to migrant communities accessing services or opportunities. And it's important to find a more creative way to communicate and engage with our diverse communities. I think language isn't just what we say, but it's also what we do and how we say it. I believe that through the use of more creative engagement methods, such as visual and performance arts, for example, we can begin to break the ice and unpack some of the grievances and tensions and challenges that our migrant and minority ethnic communities face. Being considerate of others' needs is the very first thing that goes a long way to unlocking that positive engagement. As practitioners, I think we tend to use a one-size-fits-all approach to engagement. But truly listening to the needs and the lived experiences of our diverse communities and working more collaboratively, we can develop approaches that reach and engage our so-called hard-to-reach communities. We're then able to translate these experiences into meaningful policies and engender positive change. I think there's a significant difference between understanding issues and understanding what needs to be done about those issues. And so what I'm describing is a difference between experience and expertise. We often expect that people who have the experiences are the ones who should come forward with the solutions. But I think as experts in our fields, we're the ones whose job it is to listen and learn from other people's experiences and then facilitate a pathway towards meeting those needs and creating those solutions and policies that remove those challenges. I think COVID has had a disproportionate effect on the Black, Asian, Latin American, and minority ethnic communities across the capital. And it has revealed that although a virus cannot discriminate,
Bastante llamativa en asiáticos, en minorías dentro de la sociedad. Y lo importante es que
of being exposed to COVID-19, and poverty is a big factor to being more susceptible to contracting the virus. Mixed poverty, lack of access, lack of resources and lack of opportunities, the likelihood to poor physical and mental health drastically increases. In London, I've worked closely with grassroots organizations, as Nancy's mentioned. I've worked closely with her and the Latin American Network in South London, the voluntary and community organizations during this time to tackle these inequalities and address the pressing need for change. I think grassroots organizations play such a crucial function in bridging the service user to the service provider. And voluntary and community organizations are often at the heart of our most deprived communities. they're closer to the ground and tend to yield more trust and from the community, because they are part of the community. Indeed, they are the community. And I think better allocation of resources such as funding, equipment, training, provided by the private and the public sector can support the community and voluntary sector organizations to deliver even more much needed services and go further in transforming the lives of some of our most vulnerable in our societies and creating a more equal balance between the haves and have-nots. I think poor mental health has been on the rise for some years now, but it's been accelerated by the global pandemic. Overcrowded housing accommodations with families living in cramped conditions is not conducive to well-being, and yet we find a lot of our migrant and ethnic minority communities living in these poor conditions. And I think in order to prevent this, we have to look at the root of this, the core issue of these issues. And for me, that is the inequalities that I've described. And so how can we achieve this? How can we address this issue? I think firstly, we need more proportionate representation with leaders that reflect the values and diversity of our communities. I think secondly, we need to unlock the potential of our community and voluntary organizations by supporting them through funding and access to better resources and training. Thirdly, we need to change the way that local and national decisions are made by being more collaborative with our communities. And I don't mean through involvement, but through finding a common issue that both parties want to see addressed and working more collaboratively to develop the strategies and policies that meet these needs. And lastly, to be more creative about how we approach engagement, particularly with the hard to reach and the disenfranchised communities. And I believe that no one is hard to reach, but there are people who are harder to engage. And it takes more innovation and creative methodologies to get them to engage. I believe that if we implement these 4 points, we will become the difference that we want to be. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Soleil. Very important impact we need to still doing and improve with our communities, because it's also in London we have big minority communities around London, and we want to speak more in the and to talk about the engagement in the community. And we are now going to invite one of the members of the team is Ana Ferreira. She is a PhD student for Birmingham University, and she is in charge in this Congress to take the note for the memories, and we're going to have the publication in it of the Congress with Alfredo Peter. But because Maria Limpor is apologized, she's not feel well today. She's a consul for the SADC consul, and Maria Limpor Holt is the UK was a global leader in preparing for the pandemic. All the government had the grave with the factor in the pandemic, and so she was invited for today, and we will read her paper, because I think it's very important to hear what she prepared for today, and it's very important for us. Thank you very much. Anna, can you please to read?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect.
Lovely. So I'm just reading something that was sent to me by Maria. So just to make sure that I haven't had any input in what she's written. So this is from her. The title of the article is "The UK was a global leader in preparing for the pandemic. What went wrong with coronavirus?" And then she goes, "All governments have had to grapple with the fact that the pandemic is a public health crisis that generated an economic crisis. So I have summarized the UK government track record in addressing both crises. Public health first. The record is not good. Epidemiologists and former public health officials says the UK's strategy for combating COVID-19 was muddled, leading to delays in purchasing essential equipment and tests. Mixed messages about public health practices and a lag behind its neighbours is implementing social distancing and other restrictions that allowed the virus to spread faster. Britain's first mistake came around the time when the coronavirus was first confirmed in England on January 31st. Prime Minister Boris Johnson chose not to chair a meeting of the Government Emergency Cobra Committee, leaving his Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, to do so instead. Because Johnson didn't chair the meeting at the beginning of February, the government missed the opportunity to see that they needed to be ready to do lots of testing, that they would need to sort out stocks for personal protection and for oxygen and other supplies. Johnson's decision not to step in until the beginning of March allowed shortage of vital health equipment, including tests, to sneak up on the British government, says Dr. Liam Smith, an epidemiologist of the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. So he says, during the Ebola outbreak, the government could say that what we need is more personal protection equipment or test kits. So let's find £100 million and buy them. Smith told Time, but it very rapidly became obvious in the corona pandemic that this was a global problem, and therefore global supply chains just dried up. I don't think that was something people here were really prepared for. Still in the early stages of the outbreak in February, Britain appeared to be coping well with identifying the infection and doing contact tracing. When the first 2 cases were identified in the northern city of York at the end of January, health officials put them into isolation and traced their contacts. The same was done for the men from Brighton who had travelled to Singapore and then France before returning home and infecting 4 people. The UK did really well with the earliest cases, says Helen Ward, an epidemiologist at Imperial College, whose colleagues are mathematical modelers advising the UK government on the spread of the disease. She says, I think they did a pretty good job. It didn't become clear until later when confirmed cases began to increase exponentially in early March that Britain's failure to move fast on obtaining testing kits back in February would have had such a big impact. By March, while Germany was testing some 20,000 people per day, Britain was testing on average under 2,000. On top of the mistake of not moving to obtain testing early enough, Johnson's government made it a string of controversial decisions in mid-March. The first came on March 12, the day after the WHO declared COVID-19 a pandemic, when public health officials announced the UK would cease tracing and testing the contacts of coronavirus patients, effectively accepting that a full-scale outbreak was inevitable in the country. The UK was moving to the next phase of its plan, the delay phase, where the imperative was to flatten the curve. Johnson announced at a press conference, we need to squash this sombrero. He told a packed room of journalists and officials at his 10 Downing Street residence in London, the decision to stop community testing was against the WHO advice, which is that you need to test, and push back hard to suppress the virus. Despite Johnson's announcing that Britain's new focus was to delay the spread of the disease, on March 12, it took 4 more days before he formally advised the public to begin social distancing on March 16th. In the meantime, at a press conference, his chief medical advisor mentioned the government long-term goal was for Britons to develop some kind of herd immunity, against the disease or in other words, letting a large percentage of the health population catch COVID in order to prevent it from spreading to most vulnerable. It was never official policy, it was never official policy, but coming when it did, at a time of policy vacuum, it sent a confusing message. Epidemiologists said, "I think there was an error," says Smith, the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine professor. Briefly, the government made it sound as if they were embracing the idea of herd immunity as a tool to control the epidemic, which I don't think it was ever intended to be. The message changed swiftly on March 16, 3 days later, when a new scientific study by modelers at Imperial and London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine arrived at Downing Street. It showed that the impact of the disease could be far worse than previously thought. If the government did nothing, 510,000 people would die. It predicted. If the government continued on its current course, the study said the death toll would still swell to 250,000. Later the same day, Johnson pivoted. People should work from home if they could, he said in an address to the nation, and avoid public venues like pubs and restaurants. His government did not, however, make the measure legally binding, nor did it explicitly tell businesses to close their doors. It would be a whole week until it did. By comparison, Italy went into lockdown on March 9th, Spain on March 14th, France on March 16th. On March 23rd, Johnson finally appeared on television to announce the country would go into lockdown the next day, with all non-essential travel banned and most businesses being forced to close. A further fundamental mistake was made by the Prime Minister when it was discovered that his principal advisor, Dominic Cummings, had broken the government rules regarding lockdown and had not been criticised, let alone dismissed. This had an incalculable detrimental effect on the public's attitude to government authority. By contrast, the Treasury's response to the crisis has been considered and effective. The finance measures announced by the Chancellor of the Exchequer so far fall broadly into two categories, those aimed at businesses and those aimed at people. In addition to this direct support, the Bank of England, the UK central bank, is taking action to help ensure businesses have access to low interest loans and to ensure that the market for the UK government bonds continue to function. The Bank of England is a public body, independent of government, and is tasked with maintaining monetary and financial stability. For business, the government has provided a system by paying grants or cancelling tax liability, with businesses never being required to repay the money or pay the tax at a later date, deferred tax payments, providing businesses with low interest loans, further measures aimed at people who might fall ill, lose income, or lose their jobs include increase the generosity and ease of access to statutory pay, sick pay, for those required to take time off work due to COVID-19, increasing the generosity of benefits for those out of work or on low incomes, increasing support available to self-employed people. To sum up, many mistakes were made by the government. The worst shambolic track and trace failures still persist. It is not at all clear that we will cope any better in the second wave, now gaining momentum. That's it.
Thank you very much, Anna. Okay, well, so we're going to have some discussion or conversation with Judy and Suley about their speech. We have some questions about your work, about your experience. The question one, I can't say here for both of you, is what is the positive aspect you can recognize from to the immigration when you work with migrant community, refugees? What is the positive aspect you see these people bring in for their experience? Where you this opportunity there to share for many migrants in your experience? What is some aspect you see in Judy had more than 20 years or more than 30 years work with the refugees people. People came in crisis, trauma. Sometimes the setting of the government is not very happy and prepared. What you share with us? What is the positive aspect you see? Judy. At the microphone, Judy. Is your mic? Yes.
Yes. Well, I think the country benefits enormously by people coming to this country who were not born here. It benefits by widening the view of life and experience, and taking us out of our tunnel visions of culture and experience. I don't think that's always appreciated by the general population. I think that refugees are often have enormous courage and ability to survive. I have had the privilege of speaking to many extraordinary people who've survived such hardship and difficulty, but remain human and open to experience. And I would call myself extremely lucky to have been able to talk to such people. Unfortunately, I don't think that the UK provides many refugees with the kind of opportunities that they could have to flourish in the way that they might have done in a better world.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Judy. Thank you very much. I'm thinking that is part of our mission, is to demonstrate and also fighting this recognition. Thank you, Judy. And Soleil, it's the same questions, because you had a big also experience, like you told us how is your experience, personal experience, and also what is you say the positive.
Yeah, I mean, I think migrant communities, add, a really positive dimension to the diversity of London, the country as a whole. I think, the benefits are, some of my favorite foods are not, from here. They're from, they're global foods like Chinese and Indian food, for instance, which I really enjoy. The other great element is I don't really have to travel too far to experience different cultures and different communities. I can just walk out my door and go to any part of London and experience a different community, a different culture through different races, religions, the way people interact, and so on. One of the points I always make to the young people I work with is that, just in South London, just if I look at my borough alone where I live, more than 100 different languages are spoken here. You know, when the Olympics came to London in 2012, every single language, every single flag that was represented, there was someone who lives in this borough that spoke that language. And that is amazing, you know, that fact in itself is just amazing. And it's something that, you know, enhances and broadens our own experiences and our own ways of how we look at ourselves, but how we see ourselves in a larger spectrum of the wider community that we live in.
Yeah, thank you, Soli. Yes, that is the one of the key of the fly. We are around the work because we are evolution. But talk about the crisis we have at the moment. When the pandemic, so many migrant people don't have like the language you said, the language to understand like the rules, and also to have the benefits for the government. So many then they can apply for some benefits because they don't know how. When you experience, how is the government can to improve this aspect to support the communities, to support the service, because it's many service charities or many communities, volunteers is trying to do it, but something is not connecting, or something is. What is your experience and your views about that, Judy?
Shall I? Well, of course, I know about Bristol rather than London. And our agency provides support and supervision to most of the other refugee agencies in Bristol. So I'm very much in touch with all the agencies that work here. And they are working at like double time to try to keep people informed and supported. And I know that the staff are exhausted through extra work. And some of the staff of agencies have been furloughed, leaving the other staff to have to work even harder. But there is such a mission and such a good spirit in these agencies that they do their very best under really difficult circumstances to keep everybody informed. And I was talking about the Afghani young men, for instance. They're very, very difficult. When you say hard to reach, Silly, they're hard to reach in that they don't, they're illiterate in Pashto. Mostly, I think that's because of the policies of the, what are they called? The government in Afghanistan. Oh, anyway, and the Taliban.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
And so it's difficult to reach them in writing. They have to be contacted. You have to always have a Pashto interpreter with you because they can only understand Pashto when it's spoken. And, you know, but nevertheless, all the agencies have got together to try to ensure that this particular group of people are contacted and do understand what their rights are and what they can claim and so on. I don't know that the government is doing much to ensure this, if anything, but all I know is that the agencies, the charities and the agencies are doing their best, work extremely hard to try to make sure that people are, you know, are told how they can. And there are other agencies that amongst the ones in Bristol that, for instance, give out food, go around people's doors, you know, try to ensure that people are okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Judy.
I'm sure it's not perfect, but all the people are doing their best.
Yeah, thank you. So, Leah, you are working with the government, so the many programs is in your journey, and how is this experience in this crisis for the engagement of community?
Yeah, so
¿Qué,
I guess
qué experiencia puedes compartirnos?
central government, and we have local government, local authorities.
Sí, con autoridades locales del gobierno hemos estado trabajando y exponiéndoles cómo soportar las necesidades que las organizaciones no gubernamentales, las charities locales necesitan de parte del gobierno. Creo que debería ser más fuerte, ¿no? Más significativa.
Whose job it wasn't to do deliveries, like people who worked in repairs, who worked in libraries, who worked in different services, environment, leisure, supporting to deliver those parcels, those food parcels to some of our most vulnerable in the community. So mainly people who had to shield. So the government created the shielded list that we also worked quite collaboratively on to develop, which I thought was a positive step forward, because identifying the people who needed the support the most was such an important aspect. And then secondly, giving emergency funding to community and local organizations to deliver services to migrant communities, to deliver services to those who we don't, as a local authority, reach. And so, the importance there is about the type of relationship that the local organizations have with the residents that no government can have, really, because they're kind of everyday bread and butter kind of clients, if you like. And I think, if anything from this pandemic, I've learned personally is, I guess, more value and more valuable kind of more value for local grassroots organizations who can reach the ones who are desperately in need, and us working more collaboratively in that process.
Okay, thank you, Sully. And we have to only just like 7 minutes to close these panels. And the last reflection is for UK, is one about Brexit and the pandemic. We are close to December, and we have too many millions of Europeans living in UK, and that is another crisis we have before the pandemic. And now we have this situation but close to the Brexit is the people don't have documents also. I don't know if you know about Portugal. They now give the opportunity for the people don't have documents to organize these legal situations.
¿Qué pasa ahora con la comunidad portuguesa que no tiene ahora mismo documentos para legalizar su situación migrante? ¿Qué pasa ahora?
But I don't say illegal. I say they don't have some document to stay here. What is the reflection about them under these circumstances in the coronavirus? Because they are more vulnerable. They are. Judy, what is your reflection with that? It's not the positive, or I don't know, but that is the last reflection we can do.
Am I? Oh, yes. Well, I mean, I think Brexit is the most terrible tragedy, really. And heaven knows what's going to happen. I think I'm not really qualified to say. Just personally, I feel it's a terrible tragedy for anything that restricts people's ability to move around and to know each other and to form good relationships. And I don't know what the situation is with people getting documents, but I can imagine there's going to be a great crisis about it. And
yes, yes, we can have, yes, we can have words. This is with this
yes, lost for words. How terrible! And I mean, we just heard about the mess that the government made of the of responding to the pandemic, and we have the same government and the same kind of situation around Brexit. So
yeah, thank you, Judy. I think sometimes it's too many things to say, but we can cut all the words to what you say is a tragedy. Thank you very much. And Sully, what is your view and reflection about that?
I mean, I completely agree with Judy's point. It is an absolute tragedy. I mean, the first point that we were talking about was about how much we value the diversity and, you know, how much ethnic minorities, migrants bring to the country, you know. So that all the point has been made right there.
No sense.
That is the cause, and that is the reason.
Contribuyen en este país. ¿Por qué olvidar todo esto? Yo personalmente siento que no hay muchas esperanzas para el futuro en relación a la situación reportando la cuestión. Tenemos problemas para escuchar correctamente miembros de nuestra comunidad que están ahora mismo teniendo situaciones con sus documentos. Lo que están haciendo es teniendo confusión, situaciones de crisis emocional por esta situación.
Yesterday we had a very big bad news about the next lockdown.
Yo personalmente pienso que en este momento la noticia, por ejemplo, tan negativa que hemos recibido, por ejemplo, ayer sobre un posible segundo confinamiento, lockdown, nos está afectando definitivamente a todos. Es una tragedia que nos hayan anunciado esto. Y vemos como la vulnerabilidad,
poor people, and also with this panic and also misinformation, and we are in difficult time. But one of the aspects I couldn't see for the community I work with, the Spanish Portuguese community, Latin American. Also, I work very close with the African community. Is the resilience. You say, Judy, with the refugee, the resilience people, they had hope. When in the refugees people, they work for themselves, they had a mission, they had resilience. They are very resilient to have more opportunities to. That is our topic in this Congress, is working for the community to have more positive results. And I think the first one is in our mental health. If you position to support migrant mental health with this positive aspect is the one of the key to receive and to still support this community. Judy, in 2 words, what is the gift you can give for the migrant people in 2 words? Like say, you see one person is in crisis and you need to say 2 positive words for the 2 positive words. Your microphone is off. Again, Judy, you can need to put
yeah, done it. You're asking for 2 positive words I might say to a refugee.
Yes.
Oh goodness. What comes to my mind is take heart. I don't.
Okay, great. Take heart. Okay, good. Thank you very much. And Soleil?
I think for me, it's simply be you.
Great, great. We are different, but we are important. And so thank you very much for accept this invitation and to share your experience, your knowledge, and also this